Snow fell in slow, silent sheets over the Aspen Crown Hotel, turning the city lights into soft halos. The world looked quieter under the snow, as if everything important had paused for the night. Daniel Hayes stood at the bottom of the stone steps, with one hand resting gently on the shoulder of his 8-year-old daughter, Emma Hayes. Her red velvet dress stood out brightly against the white snowflakes drifting through the air. In her small hands she held a cream-colored envelope, the edges slightly bent where she had squeezed it too tightly during the drive. Inside the envelope was something she had spent 3 evenings making, a simple card, purple marker, gold glitter glue, and 4 carefully written words, "For the kids." Emma looked up at the tall hotel doors glowing with warm, golden light. "Dad," she asked quietly, "do you think they'll like it?" Daniel glanced down at the card and smiled gently. "They'll love it." But Emma shook her head slightly. "It's not for them." She held the envelope closer to her chest. "It's for the kids Mom helped." The Eleanor Hayes Foundation Charity Gala had always been Eleanor's event. 7 years earlier, it had begun at a folding table in the basement of their home in Denver. Eleanor had worked late into the night organizing volunteers, writing emails, and reviewing grant proposals. She never cared about attention. She cared about results. By the time she died 8 months earlier, the foundation was helping thousands of children living in transitional housing across several states. Daniel had not attended the gala since. Grief had a way of rearranging time. But 3 weeks ago, Emma had found something in the hallway closet while looking through a box of her mother's things. A yellow legal pad filled with Eleanor's careful handwriting, notes, plans, reminders for the foundation board, and on the final page one simple request: "Please don't let the children disappear." Emma had read the line 3 times before bringing the notebook to Daniel at the kitchen table. "Dad," she had said, "I think Mom still wants us to go." And so tonight they had come, not for speeches, not for attention, just to deliver a small handmade card. They climbed the steps slowly. Inside the lobby, guests moved beneath warm lights, dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. Laughter drifted through the glass doors along with the faint sound of music from somewhere deeper inside the building. Emma took a small breath of cold air. "I'm a little nervous," she whispered. Daniel squeezed her shoulder gently. "That just means you care." She nodded seriously. At the top of the steps, the glass doors opened. A woman in a black blazer stepped forward before they could enter. Her posture was sharp, professional. Her eyes moved quickly over Daniel's gray suit, then down to his slightly wet shoes, then to Emma. "This is a private event," the woman said. "Black tie, invitation only." Daniel reached calmly into his jacket and pulled out a cream envelope with his name embossed across the front. "We have an invitation." The woman barely glanced at it. Her clipboard lifted slightly as she scanned the guest list. "I'm afraid your name isn't here." Emma looked up at her father, confused. "But Dad..." Daniel knelt slightly beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. Then he stood and spoke again. "My name is Daniel Hayes." The woman's expression did not change. "I understand that's what you're claiming," she replied coolly. "We've had people try similar things before." She stepped closer, gently but firmly guiding them away from the entrance. Emma's hand tightened around the envelope, and as they moved aside, the card slipped from her fingers. It fell onto the wet stone. The glitter smeared slightly in the melting snow. Emma stared at it in silence, and the woman's heel came down on the corner of the card. A small sound, barely noticeable, but to Emma it sounded like something breaking. The woman standing at the entrance carried herself with the confidence of someone used to controlling a room before anyone else even spoke. Her name was Isabella Vaughn, though Daniel didn't know that yet. She held a sleek black clipboard in one hand and wore a fitted blazer over an evening dress that looked expensive without trying too hard. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and the expression on her face suggested that interruptions were not something she tolerated. As Daniel and Emma reached the top step, Isabella opened the door only halfway. "Good evening," Daniel said politely. "This is a private event," Isabella replied before he could continue. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and completely impersonal. "Black tie, invitation only." Emma instinctively stepped closer to her father. Daniel slipped his hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out the formal invitation. The cream envelope was slightly wrinkled from the cold, but the embossed lettering was still clearly visible. "We have an invitation," he said calmly. He held the envelope out. Isabella didn't take it. Instead, she glanced down at it briefly and then back up at Daniel's face. "That name is not on my current list." She tapped the clipboard lightly. "We updated the guest registry last week." Daniel kept his voice steady. "My name is Daniel Hayes." For a brief second, Isabella's eyes paused, not with recognition, with calculation. Then she gave a small, dismissive smile. "I understand that's what you're claiming," she said. Her gaze dropped again to Daniel's shoes, damp from the snow, then to the sleeve of his coat, which carried faint traces of melting flakes. "We occasionally have individuals who attempt to use events like this to gain access," she continued. Her tone lowered slightly, as if explaining something to someone who should already understand. "It can be disruptive for our guests." Emma frowned slightly. "We're not—" Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's all right." Isabella stepped forward now, her posture shifting from polite to authoritative. "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the entrance." Daniel didn't move. For a moment, the snow continued to fall quietly around them. Then Isabella reached out and took hold of his arm. Not violently, but firmly, the kind of touch used to move something out of the way. She guided him 2 steps to the side of the landing. Daniel's shoes slid slightly on the wet granite, and he caught himself on the iron railing. Emma gasped softly. It wasn't a loud sound, just the quick, startled breath of a child watching something unfair happen. In the movement, the envelope slipped from her hands. The card slid out as it hit the stone. The glitter glue caught the light from the hotel entrance. "For the kids." The purple letters looked small against the cold gray ground. Emma stared at it. "Oh." Daniel crouched slightly to reach for it, but Isabella moved first. She stepped forward, and the heel of her shoe came down directly on the corner of the card. The glitter smeared instantly against the wet granite. A thin line of purple ink blurred into the snowmelt. The sound was tiny, but to Emma it felt enormous. She froze. "That's enough," Isabella said sharply. She turned toward the lobby. Security. 2 uniformed guards near the door looked over. "Please remove these 2 from the entrance." Inside the lobby, guests had begun to notice. Men in tuxedos, women in elegant gowns. A few people turned to watch the scene unfolding through the glass doors. None of them moved. Daniel slowly picked up the card. The bottom corner was damp now. Some of the glitter had washed away. He held it carefully between his fingers. Emma's voice was quiet beside him. "She made that." Isabella didn't respond. Emma swallowed hard. "My mom," she added. Daniel looked down at his daughter. Her eyes were bright, but she refused to cry. "It's for the kids," Emma said. Her voice trembled slightly, but stayed steady. "Mom said if we stopped helping them, it would all have been for nothing." Isabella crossed her arms. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said in the flat tone of someone who wasn't. Then she leaned slightly toward Daniel. "The dead mother story is very moving," she added quietly. "But this is still a private event." Emma's face went very still. Daniel felt something shift deep inside his chest. Not grief, that had come and gone in waves for months. This was something colder, something clearer. He straightened slowly. "Emma," he said gently, "can you hold the card for a moment?" She took it carefully and pressed it against her chest. Daniel adjusted the sleeve of his coat. Then he looked directly at Isabella Vaughn. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. "My name," he said, "is Daniel Hayes." And this time he did not say it as a request. He said it as a fact. Daniel stood perfectly still as the snow continued to fall around them. Emma held the damaged card against her chest, her small hands pressing the damp corner flat, as if she could somehow undo what had just happened. Across from them, Isabella Vaughn waited with the rigid patience of someone certain the situation was already under control. Daniel spoke again, his voice calm and steady. "My name is Daniel Hayes," he repeated. "I am the founder of North River Holdings." For the first time, Isabella's expression flickered. Not recognition yet, but something close. Daniel continued before she could interrupt. "North River Holdings holds 71% of the parent equity that funds the Hayes Group." He gestured lightly toward the glowing hotel behind her. "That includes this building, this foundation, and your position." The snow seemed suddenly louder against the granite steps. Isabella's lips parted slightly. Then she recovered. "I'm afraid I don't know what kind of misunderstanding you're attempting to create," she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked the screen and held it toward her. "Please call Richard Caldwell," he said, "chairman of the board." Isabella hesitated. Inside the lobby, the two security guards had stopped moving. Several guests were now openly watching through the glass doors. Daniel's phone screen lit the falling snow between them. Finally, Isabella took it. Her fingers moved across the screen as she read the contact name. R. Caldwell, board chair. Below it sat 3 missed calls and a message. She opened the text. For a moment, her eyes stopped moving. The message read, "Daniel, I understand you're at the entrance. Please come inside immediately. We need to talk." Sent 11 minutes ago. Isabella slowly lifted her eyes. The color had drained slightly from her face. "Mr. Hayes," she said carefully. Daniel waited. Her hand tightened around the phone. "The board informed us that you were on extended leave," she continued. "That you were unavailable for—" "I was grieving," Daniel said quietly. The words were not angry. They were simply true. Emma shifted beside him, still holding the card. Isabella handed the phone back slowly. The confident posture she had carried only moments earlier now seemed uncertain. For a brief second, she looked around the lobby behind her, as if searching for someone else to take control of the situation. That was when the glass doors opened again. "Daniel?" The voice came from behind Isabella. A tall man in his 60s stepped out onto the landing, adjusting the sleeve of his tuxedo. Richard Caldwell, chairman of the Hayes Foundation board. He stopped when he saw the scene. His eyes moved from Daniel to Emma to the damaged card in her hands, and finally to Isabella. "Richard," Daniel said simply. Caldwell walked down the steps quickly and extended his hand. "Daniel, I'm so glad you came." The words hung in the cold air. Behind him, several guests inside the lobby exchanged confused looks. Daniel shook his hand calmly. Emma looked up at the older man. "Hi," she said softly. Caldwell's expression softened immediately. "Well, hello there," he said. Then he looked back at Isabella. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Isabella's clipboard slipped from her fingers and struck the stone floor with a sharp crack. She didn't pick it up. Her eyes moved between the two men. "Mr. Caldwell," she said slowly, "this man claims to be—" "This is Daniel Hayes," Caldwell interrupted. The statement landed with quiet finality. Isabella blinked. Her composure cracked for the first time. Guests inside the lobby were now openly staring. Someone whispered. Emma tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Dad," she asked quietly, "are we allowed to go inside now?" Daniel looked down at her. "Yes," he said softly. Then he lifted his eyes back to Isabella Vaughn. She stood frozen on the landing, snow gathering on her shoulders. For the first time that evening, she looked like someone who realized she had made a very serious mistake. The warmth of the Aspen Crown lobby wrapped around them as the glass doors closed behind Daniel and Emma. For a moment, the quiet felt almost unnatural after the cold wind outside. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns stood scattered across the marble floor, holding champagne glasses and whispering softly. But something about the room felt wrong. Daniel noticed it immediately. The lobby had once been designed to tell a story. Eleanor had insisted on that. Every year, the north wall displayed photographs of the children the foundation helped, graduation pictures from the literacy program, families receiving housing support, students holding certificates from tutoring programs. Real faces, real lives. But now the wall looked different. Daniel stopped walking. Emma tugged gently at his hand. "Dad?" He was staring at the empty space where the photographs used to be. In their place were framed corporate displays. The Hayes Group logo repeated in polished silver lettering. Large promotional banners describing brand partnerships and corporate development initiatives. The children were gone. Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. Not grief, something colder, something sharper. Around them, conversations in the lobby had faded into silence. People were watching now. Daniel turned slowly toward Richard Caldwell. "Where are the photographs?" Caldwell hesitated. "They were removed during the rebranding initiative," he said carefully. "Rebranding?" Daniel repeated the word like he was testing how it sounded out loud. "The board felt the foundation needed stronger corporate alignment," Caldwell continued cautiously. "Corporate alignment," Daniel said quietly. Emma looked up at the empty wall. "I liked the pictures," she said. "They showed the kids." Her small voice carried across the silent lobby. Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Then he turned toward the far side of the room. Standing near the entrance, Isabella Vaughn had not moved. Her posture was composed again, but the earlier confidence was gone. She watched Daniel the way someone watches a storm approaching across open water. Daniel took a few steps toward her. Every sound in the lobby seemed amplified now. The soft tapping of his shoes, the faint clinking of glasses. "Ms. Vaughn," he said. "Yes, Mr. Hayes." Her voice was steady again, but only just. Daniel gestured toward the wall. "Why were the photographs removed?" "They did not align with the foundation's updated branding strategy," Isabella replied. Her tone carried the precise language of boardroom presentations. "The board approved a transition toward a more modern philanthropic model." Daniel studied her face. "And what exactly does that mean?" "It means," Isabella continued, "that the foundation has shifted towards strategic investment and corporate partnerships that create sustainable growth." Emma frowned slightly. "Growth for who?" she asked. Several people nearby shifted uncomfortably. Isabella did not answer the child. Daniel's gaze moved past her toward a nearby table where a stack of informational brochures had been arranged for guests. He picked one up. The brochure described the foundation's new direction: corporate advisory programs, executive leadership development, consulting partnerships. Daniel turned a page, then another. He looked back at Caldwell. "Where are the youth programs?" he asked. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "The literacy program in Pueblo, suspended," he admitted quietly. "The transitional housing stipends in Denver, temporarily paused." Daniel flipped another page. "The school supply distribution program, under review." Emma tugged gently at his sleeve again. "Dad," she whispered, "those are the kids Mom helped." Daniel closed the brochure slowly. Inside the ballroom down the corridor, music began to play softly as the evening program prepared to begin. The sound drifted through the hallway like something happening in a completely different world. Daniel looked back at Isabella Vaughn. "How much money did the foundation raise last year?" he asked. $4 million, she replied automatically. "And how much of that reached the children?" Isabella hesitated. For the first time since the conversation began, she did not have a rehearsed answer. Daniel's voice remained calm. "Let me try a different question." He placed the brochure back on the table. "How much of that money went somewhere else?" The silence in the lobby became absolute. Several guests were now openly recording on their phones. Caldwell cleared his throat quietly. "Daniel," he said, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." Daniel shook his head. "No." He turned back toward Isabella. "8 months ago, my wife died," he said. "She spent 7 years building this foundation to help children who had nothing." Emma squeezed the damaged card in her hands. "And tonight I walk into this building and discover the children have disappeared from the walls." He paused. "So I'm going to ask you again. Where did the money go?" Isabella's composure finally cracked. Her eyes flickered toward Caldwell, then toward the security guards, then back to Daniel. "Mr. Hayes," she began carefully, "these financial decisions were made with board approval." "Which board members?" Daniel asked immediately. "The executive committee." "And who signed the authorizations?" Isabella did not answer. Caldwell spoke instead. "Charles Ostro," he said quietly. Daniel's head turned. Across the lobby, a man in a gray tuxedo stood near the bar. Charles Ostro, managing director of the foundation. He had been laughing with two donors only moments earlier. Now he looked like someone who had suddenly realized the ground beneath him might not be stable. Daniel studied him for a moment, then he turned back to Isabella. "Miss Vaughn," he said calmly. "Yes. Your employment with the Hayes Group and all affiliated foundations is terminated, effective immediately." The words landed with quiet finality. No raised voice, no anger, just a decision. Isabella stared at him. "You can't do that without a board vote," she said. Daniel met her eyes. "I own 71% of the company that funds this foundation." He gestured toward the door. "Human Resources will contact you tomorrow regarding severance documentation." For a moment, Isabella looked as if she might argue. Then she looked around the silent lobby, at the guests, at the security guards, at Richard Caldwell. No one moved to support her. She picked up her clipboard slowly, then she turned and walked toward the side exit without another word. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, and the real storm of the evening had only just begun. The gala ended differently than anyone had expected. The orchestra still played, dinner was still served, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted completely. Conversations were quieter, eyes moved more carefully, and many guests kept glancing toward Daniel Hayes, as if they were witnessing the beginning of something much larger than a charity event. Because they were. The real story began the following Monday morning. At 7:30 a.m., a forensic audit team arrived at the headquarters of the Eleanor Hayes Foundation. They worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had uncovered financial crimes before. Laptops opened, files were secured, bank accounts were traced. Every transaction made during the previous 4 years was examined line by line. Daniel sat in a conference room overlooking the city while the process began. Richard Caldwell joined him along with the foundation's legal counsel, Margaret Briggs, a woman whose calm voice and sharp attention to detail had guided companies through far worse crises. Margaret placed a thick folder on the table. "We've already identified irregularities," she said. Daniel opened the folder. Inside were dozens of financial summaries, payment logs, and authorization records. One number had been circled in red, $82 million. Daniel read the number twice. $82 million, he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "That's the amount currently unaccounted for." The room was silent for several seconds. Richard leaned forward. "The money was redirected through a consulting firm," he explained. Daniel looked at the report. "Summit Strategy Partners." "Never heard of them," Daniel said. "That's because they didn't exist until 11 months ago," Margaret replied. She turned another page. "The company is registered in Delaware under a single officer whose identity cannot be verified through normal public records." Daniel leaned back slowly. "A shell company." Margaret nodded once. 12 payments were authorized from the foundation's operating accounts over an 11-month period. She tapped the total again. $82 million. Daniel studied the authorization signatures. Every payment had been approved by the same person, Charles Ostro, managing director of the foundation, the same man who had been laughing comfortably with donors during the gala. "And Isabella Vaughn?" Daniel asked. Margaret turned another page. She signed 2 of the authorizations. Richard sighed heavily. "We believe she understood part of what was happening," he said, "but not all of it." Daniel closed the folder. "Begin a full forensic audit," he said. "Every account, every transaction." Margaret nodded. "It's already underway." By Wednesday afternoon, the scale of the fraud had grown even larger. The audit team uncovered connections between the shell company and 2 additional financial entities operating under different names. Funds had been moved repeatedly through layered accounts designed to hide their origin. The investigation report listed multiple potential criminal charges: wire fraud, forgery of authorizing signatures, money laundering through a nonprofit structure, breach of fiduciary duty. Margaret called Daniel that afternoon. 42 possible criminal counts, she said. Daniel was silent for a moment. "And the programs?" he asked. Margaret paused. "The literacy program serving 900 children in rural Colorado was defunded 6 months ago." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "And the housing assistance program?" "Suspended." The theft had not only taken money, it had taken opportunity from hundreds of children. 2 days later, the situation escalated even further. On Thursday morning, the audit team reported that Charles Ostro had booked an international flight leaving the country, Denver to Toronto, then onward to Zurich. Daniel didn't need to say anything. Margaret had already contacted federal authorities. When Charles Ostro arrived at the airport gate that afternoon, 2 federal agents were waiting. He was taken into custody before the plane began boarding. The arrest report would later list the charges formally: fraud, financial conspiracy, money laundering, and multiple counts related to misuse of nonprofit funds. News of the arrest spread quickly, but the story that captured public attention was something else entirely: the video from the gala entrance. 11 different guests had recorded the moment outside the hotel. The clips showed the snow, Emma standing quietly with the damaged card, and the moment Daniel spoke his name. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed over 6 million times. But the most shared moment wasn't the confrontation. It was the image of Emma holding the card against her chest, refusing to cry. A small girl standing in the snow protecting something her mother had believed in. And because of that moment, the world began paying attention to the foundation again. The press conference was held 1 week after the gala, not in a ballroom, not under chandeliers, but inside the foundation's main conference room. Daniel had insisted on restoring the room first. The photographs of the children had been returned to the walls exactly where Eleanor had originally placed them. Graduation pictures, classroom scenes, families receiving keys to their first stable homes. Real faces, real lives. 30 journalists filled the room. Cameras pointed toward the podium. Board members sat quietly along the sidewall. Daniel stepped forward first. He spoke calmly for 9 minutes. He explained the investigation, the missing $82 million, the arrest of Charles Ostro, the reforms now being implemented to ensure the foundation would never again lose sight of its mission. Every financial record would now be public. Every program would be independently audited, and every dollar donated would go where it was meant to go. "To the children," Daniel said. When he finished, he stepped aside. "My daughter would like to say something." Emma walked slowly toward the microphone. She held 2 cards. The new ones someone had made for her that morning. Clean, bright, perfect. And the other one, the original card. The one with the smeared glitter and blurred purple letters from the snow outside the hotel. She placed both cards gently on the podium. "My mom built this," Emma said into the microphone. Her voice was small but steady, and some people tried to take it. She looked out at the cameras. but we're not going to let them. The room was silent. Emma lifted the damaged card. My mom said if we ever felt tired or sad, we should remember why we started helping people. She paused for a moment. Then she smiled slightly. So, don't give up. For several seconds, no one moved. Then someone in the back of the room began to clap. Slowly. Others joined, until the entire room was standing. Within hours, the speech spread across the internet. Donations began arriving that same afternoon. Thousands of small contributions from people who had seen Emma's message and believed in it. By the end of the week, the foundation had received more than $2 million in new donations, enough to restore every program that had been shut down. A month later, the board made one final decision. The foundation would be renamed, not after Daniel, not after the company, but after the little girl who reminded everyone why the work mattered. The Emma Hayes Foundation. Its first event under the new name wasn't a gala. It was a visit to 3 program sites across Colorado. Classrooms, housing programs, school supply drives. Emma visited all of them. At one classroom, a boy her age looked at her and asked, "Are you the girl from the news?" Emma thought about it. Then she smiled. "I think so." Daniel stood nearby watching her talk with the other children. For the first time in many months, the work felt whole again. Later that evening, Emma asked him a question in the kitchen. "Dad, are we still helping the kids?" Daniel smiled and placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Always." And somewhere beyond the windows, light snow began to fall again. Not heavy this time, just enough to remind them that even the coldest nights can lead to a new beginning. If you enjoyed this story about courage, family, and doing the right thing, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this, because sometimes the smallest voices remind the world of the biggest truths.